In the next 20 to 25 minutes, we are going to discuss historical materialism, a theory given by Karl Marx. We know that Marx talks about another materialism, and that is dialectical materialism. Before we get into historical materialism, let's make things clear. Dialectical materialism represents the philosophical basis of Marxism, while historical materialism represents its scientific or empirical basis. To say it differently, dialectical materialism is the subject of philosophical speculation, but historical materialism is a subject of social and historical investigation. Historical materialism implies that in any given age, time, era, epoch, the economic relations of society exert a preponderant influence in shaping the progress of society and in molding social, political, intellectual, and ethical relationships. To say it again differently, all types of social relations, Marx tells us, prevailing at any stage of historical development are determined by the economic conditions according to Marx. So Marx's argument is beginning with the simple statement that the survival of man depends upon his efficiency in the production of material things. Production is therefore the most important of all human activity. Society comes into existence primarily, Marx is telling us, for the purpose of what? Purpose of economic production, because that is the only means on which human life is based. So for the purpose of economic production, society is coming into existence. Why? Because man in association produce more than in isolation. This is yet another claim by Marx, and that's why society is coming into being. For Marx, a perfect society will secure all the necessities of life to the satisfaction of all its members. But according to his concept of dialectical materialism, perfection comes through a very long process of conflict between antagonistic elements. Society, since inception, has always been subject to internal stresses and strains. So it's not a simple, straightforward journey. Society has gone through so many up downs, so many conflicts, so many pressures. And man is always unsatisfied because of limited availability. Therefore, the satisfaction which is not fulfilled is the result of the defective modes of production. As man's knowledge of truth is also imperfect, he is always imagining another world where all his needs will be met. Here comes the scope for religious thinking. When religion comes into existence as the heart of a heartless, the spirit of conditions utterly unspiritual. When man is helpless, religion comes into existence. But in reality, for Marx, religion is no more than the shadow cast by a defective economic system, which will disappear with the removal of those defects. So if you are removing the defects in the economic system, then religion, according to Marx, will disappear. Marx had a special view about religion, and he dubbed religion as the opium of the people. Because for him, when no one's needs are fully met in society, religion is the result of all. As the process of material production holds the key to man's social life, changes in this process are responsible for all historical development. And this is where Marx is beginning to highlight the changes and what are the causes of these changes, how these changes are taking place. This is the subject matter of his ideas on historical materialism. His description of historical development is based on the concept of historical materialism. Now he is making it clear that in the social production of their life, man is entering into definite relations, and these relations are indispensable, independent of human beings' will. The relations of productions which correspond to a definite stage of development of their material productive forces. So these relations are corresponding to the forces of production in a given age. What is the sum total of these relations of production? The sum total is constituting the economic structure, which is the real basis on which rises a legal and political superstructure. So Marx is highlighting, in fact, in his critique, or to say it in full sentence, a contribution to the critique of political economy, written by him in mid-19th century. He is highlighting here base and superstructure. Now, according to this interpretation, the mode of production in a given society constitutes its base, and legal and political institutions, including religious and morals, etc., are constituting its superstructure. So, base and superstructure. Now, what are the causes behind changes in the mode of production? There are two structures. But what causes change in the modes of production? Now Marx is explaining it by claiming that at a certain stage of their development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production. So there is a conflict between forces of production and relations of production. And when this conflict is getting intensified, then new mode of production is emerging. So before we go into that, it is necessary for us to distinguish between forces of production and relations of production. And together these two are constituting mode of production. So there is a mode of production constituted by the forces of production and relations of production. Now forces of production, as we are clarifying it again, has got two elements. One is means of production and second labor power. Means of production includes tools, machines, factories, and so on. And labor power is everything man possesses personally out of skills, knowledge, experience, and other human faculties. The relations of productions are constituted by the pattern of economic ownership of means of production. Marx is telling us that each stage of historical development, owners of means of production constitute the dominant class, and those left with labor power only constitute the dependent class. So Marx is highlighting two classes here, dominant class, dependent class, but antagonistic relations. These relations are caused by changes in the mode of production. Now, man's constant search for improvement of production leads to the development of forces of production. As the means of production are improved by the scientific discoveries and invention of new techniques and other things, labor power is developed by the acquisition of new knowledge, education, and training. So what is happening when these things are happening? The development of the forces of production is leading to the contradiction between the forces of production and the relations of production, because now there is a different relationship. So the intensification of this contradiction, how it takes place? It happens in a stage when the existing relations of production are no longer compatible with the level of development of forces of production. There is a mismatch. Relations of production and the forces of production because of development. To take one example, industrialization. Now, what will happen with the rise of industrialization, the sphere of forces of production? The pre-existing feudal system in the sphere of relations of production is bound to collapse and now being replaced by a new capitalist mode of production. So when new mode of production is emerging, the existing relations are also collapsing. This breakdown of existing mode of production, along with its superstructure, is ensured by the changes in the mode of production and changes in the relations of production. Now, this process of historical development can also be explained by dialectical method, which we will be dealing it at another point. But coming back to historical materialism, now Marx is imagining how historical materialism is progressing. There are two classes, and there will be clash between the existing social relations between these two classes and the new productive forces. A new revolutionary class will emerge by overthrowing the existing order in a violent revolution. So the old order is giving way to new slave society, is replaced by feudal society. So the beginning is made with the replacement of slave society by feudal society, and feudal society is replaced by capitalist society. Capitalist society again is replaced by socialist society. According to Marxian dialectical logic, every stage of social development which falls short of perfection contains the seeds of its own decay. It has to go away and give way to a new age. Now, Marx saw his contemporary capitalist society as an imperfect stage, because it was marked by the division of society into antagonistic classes, the haves and have-nots, bourgeoisie, the proletariat, the dominant and dependent classes, and the consequent exploitation of the dependent class. So, therefore, it was doomed due to an interplay of its inherent contradiction. Marx and Engels here are identifying four main stages of past historical development. The primitive communism, in which the forms of production are slight and communally owned. This is primitive communism. Second stage is ancient slave-owning society, in which the means of production are owned by masters and labor for production is done by the slaves. So master-slave relations between two classes. At the third level, medieval feudal society, in which the means of production are owned by feudal lords and labor for production is done by the serfs. In the last stage of our time comes modern capitalist society, in which the means of production are owned by capitalists and labor for production is done by the proletariats, the propertyless workers. At each stage, society is divided into two antagonistic classes. The class which owns the means of social production and controls the forces of production dominates the rest, thus perpetuating tension and conflict. At each stage of historical development, the forms or conditions of production determine the structure of society. What are the conditions of production? Accordingly will be the structure of society. So the handmill will give you a society with a feudal lord, the steam mill society will give you the industrial capitalist. Now, the structure of society will in its turn breed attitudes, actions, and civilizations. Therefore, all these social, political, and intellectual relations, all religious and legal systems, all the theoretical outlooks which emerged in the course of history are derived from the material conditions of life. It is the material condition of life which is the most important factor in relations of human being between two classes. The forces of capitalism, according to Marx, had heralded a new era of progress. How? By destroying the feudal system. But Marx saw capitalism itself as a transitory phase. He is sure that this capitalist system will wither away. Why? Because he was confident about class conflict, which according to him was inevitable during the capitalist stage of historical development, and he is predicting here another revolution. And that is why he is anticipating a more profound revolution, which he calls the socialist revolution. What will happen by this revolution? By this revolution, the rising proletariat will displace the middle class for power, as the middle class had displaced the older feudal class. Now Marx believed that the socialist revolution would pave the way for the termination of the era of exploitation. So this is his historical materialism, wherein he is thinking about historical development of society in many stages because of its inherent conflict and because of its organization in terms of class relations between the dominant and the dependent class. This is how Marxian idea of historical materialism is offered to us. One can go on and on by giving so many examples, but for our purposes, elementary understanding of historical materialism includes his description on the basis of dialectical materialism, of what? Of four stages: master slave society, feudal lord and serf society, capitalist and proletariat society, and then socialist society.